everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lacey, and I will be your host for this webinar. This is a very exciting webinar as we have our guest from Interdobs in the Netherlands joining us today. Interdobs has become the leading SAP service provider in the field of business intelligence. They provide their customers with advice, management, and project support on SAP's on-premise cloud products for data modeling, data analysis, dashboards, and reports, predictive analysis, and HANA products. Today, we're going to be hearing from Ronald Konyngenenberg, who is Interdobs Chief Innovation Officer, Kim Koster, Interdobs Senior BI Specialist, and Xavier Hacking, a Senior SAP front-end developer at Interdobs and also an author. Today, our guests will be sharing with us about how they're using SAP Data Warehouse Cloud to modernize data management in real life. Before we get started, I want to go over a few features able with this webinar so we're all comfortable using this space. I'd like to draw your attention to the engagement bar at the bottom of your screen. I encourage you to engage with the presenters by using the Q&A widget. Feel free to ask your questions here throughout the presentation, and our presenters will be addressing the questions at the end of the presentation. I'd also like to point out the resources widget where you can learn more about Interdobs. And lastly, I'd like to invite you to take part in our survey using the survey widget located at the bottom of your screen. The survey is only 2 questions, and it helps us ensure that these webinars are meeting your needs. All right, with housekeeping being taken care of, I'd like to pass the webinar to our guest. Go ahead, Ronald.
Thank you, Lacey. A very warm welcome from all of us at Interdobs. We want to tell something about our project which went live a couple of weeks ago on SAP Data Warehouse Cloud at our client IGM. We have some slides prepared for you, but also, of course, some demos. So we'll be showing some coding we have done in the system, and Xavier will also show us some dashboarding tools. So to show also the end result when you create a model in Data Warehouse Cloud, how that ends up in SAC in SAP Analytics Cloud. Why did we start this project? So what are the initial obstacles and goals? So our client is IGM Resins. It's a chemicals company, which is basically a leading company in the UV-EB industry. What they basically do is they make ink, material also for UV. So in order, for instance, if you go to the dentist and you get a filling, in order to harden that filling, you use UV light. IGM is specialized in creating the ink, let's say the contents of that material in order to get it hard. They also create wood coating, flooring, inkjet, paint, and all the rest of it. So they are really specialized in that sort of area. They started off in 2000 as a trading company, small company. They started off in the garage box, actually, with one person who was starting the company. Now they're close to 900 people worldwide, and they have factories in China, Italy, and the US. So they basically started off somewhere last year with an implementation of S/4HANA public cloud in order to get a multitude of systems onto one platform. So currently today IGM has several systems. On this slide you can see a few of them. So we have Unit 4, we have Dynamics, of course we have Excel, SQL databases, YONU, and you name it. Basically all these different components. It was very difficult for IGM to have a process which was harmonized, but also the data coming out of the process which should be harmonized. So initially we started off with SAC in this project as a SAP Analytics Cloud. What we already saw quite early on in the project is that would not be sufficient to cater for all the different needs we had at this client. For instance, you can imagine that if you have a combination of data coming from S/4HANA public cloud, as well as these source systems you see on the slide here, it's difficult to report out of, for instance, one material mass or one customer or one value field. So actually what we did in all our models in the data warehouse is we harmonize and combine data. And basically the tool of choice we used for that was Data Warehouse Cloud. So how does SAP Data Warehouse Cloud solve our problem? So basically this is a landscape picture. So what we do is we have a multitude of external systems, which we saw on the previous slide, and we feed that into Data Warehouse Cloud. So on the left-hand side of the slide, you see the external systems which via CPI are loaded into DWC, into Data Warehouse Cloud. As you might know, DWC is basically made up of three components. So you have embedded HANA, which is the underlying HANA database. You have DWC itself, which is the web application where you can do your modeling and all your space management and all the rest of it. And SAC is on top of it, which is the dashboarding tool. And that specific SAC is embedded into DWC. So basically you have one stack of one solution to cater for your needs. That embedded HANA, which you see on the bottom of this screen, is very convenient because we actually use that in order to get the data from the external systems into the system. So you have two ways of loading data into DWC. You could use the HTML page, the web page, the normal application itself, or you can load data into the underlying HANA system. And we actually do that by using CPI. So we load directly the data via CPI in the HANA database, and then we use the results of that exercise in our models. So basically in DWC, you can use your own ETL tooling in order to load the data into the system. Basically what we do in DWC is combine all the data via SQL views. We have some examples later on of what exactly we do. But you can imagine that if you combine data from several sources, that we do lots of mappings, for instance. So we map to S4 materials, map to S4 customers. We do currency translations. We all do all different sorts of calculations. And we use predominantly SQL views for that. Good to know also is that the way S4HANA basically talks to DWC is via OData. So in S4HANA, on-prem, but as well as in the cloud, you have something called CDS views and then analytical queries. And basically, in order to get the data into DWC, you need to have a CDS view, which is of the type OData, basically an API, and you can load the data into the system. Funny enough, that's different when you load directly data into SAC. So the interface between S4HANA and SAC is different. So if you would use on the right-hand side, for instance, we have a separate tenant called SAC Planning, and we use that because we also need planning functionality within IGM. So part of the data is actually going to DWC, for instance, to combine data for our sales reports or our global stock reports, but we also use the data, for instance, customer material master data, to feed global dimensions in SAC Planning. And the way you do that is slightly different. So you actually use their CDS views and analytical queries as opposed to OData. So that's a little peculiarity most probably, but it works. So when we started off this project, we actually had some challenges because it was a fairly new project and also fairly new for us. So that means that we created our own best practices and architecture. And that's something which is very important when you're doing a DWC project. It is a data warehouse cloud solution, or it's a data warehouse solution which is put into the market as being a business data warehouse, which could be true, but the way we actually use it is as a full data warehouse. And if you do that, then basically you have to have some architecture in place. And that's something we see on this slide. So what we did is actually we create a layered approach. So what happens, for instance, is that we have a certain CDS view. Let's say that it's a sales analytical CDS view, and we expose that via OData to DWC. We could directly create a model on top of that table, but what happens is that when the underlying CDS view, for whatever reason, changes, because you add an additional field, for instance, the target architecture might not work anymore. So basically the model which is built in DWC will not directly know that the underlying model has changed. And in order to circumvent this, we've created a new architecture which is using decouple SQL views, as we call them. So what we do is we get the table, we do a select star, very simple. We take all the fields and then we build on top of that, that architecture. And that works very well. So that's one of the best practices I would like to share with you, is that if you're really building something which is which is a full-blown solution with different layers of data and also harmonization. This is something which will definitely work for you. And we found out the semi-hard way, so take advantages of this. So this slide is, it's not scary picture number one, but it's actually a picture of one of our data flows. So this is the SAC Global Sales Report. So on the left-hand side, we actually see data coming from Unit 4 via CPI directly into the HANA table, which is below DWC. And we use there, we get their open sales data, for instance. On the right-hand side, we actually get the data which is coming from S4, but also from Excel and also from different tables. So the beauty of DWC is that within every data warehouse solution, you can actually combine the data quite nicely. And on the right-hand side, for instance, what we see there is that we use data coming from a sales CDS view. And because we have to do an alternative unit of measure calculation, so basically the US, in the case of IGM, is using a different base unit of measure than Europe is using. So that means that we actually have to do a translation into kilos. In order to do that, we basically pick up the CDS view, which is called unit of measure, coming from S4. So we also use the currency translation tables, unit of measure tables, master data tables coming from S4 in order to fill the data warehouse and to use that into our different calculations. That's actually something you see in the middle of the screen. So you see that there is a calculation towards dollars and euros. And actually we union that together, and then basically we report out into the SAC global model. This is an example of a staggered approach or a layered approach, as we call it. So results achieved. So one of the biggest achievements we have is that we actually have combined sales and stock data, which was not something which IGM had before in an automated way. Of course, they had it, but they had it in Excel predominantly, which of course is not the way to go. So we basically, like I already explained, we map everything in towards a common data model, and that common data model is then consumed in SAC, and in that way we have a single reporting platform. So all the external data which is now currently in this system, coming from Unit 4 and the other systems I just mentioned before, a couple of slides before, that will all be phased out, because at the end of the day, IGM will have a full-blown S/4HANA public cloud solution for all their countries which are basically part of the company, being, for instance, Spain, Italy, China, US, and the Netherlands, of course, you name it. So in the end result, we'll still have some external data, which most likely will be budget data and historical data, but the majority of the data will come out of S4 in the future. Right, lessons learned. I already mentioned it briefly. A good data warehouse architecture is key, and that might be slightly confusing when you look at DWC, because you might see that as being a tool in which you can easily model. Of course, you can do that. So you can create your own simple models by loading an Excel file, combining some data, and creating an SAC report or dashboard on top of that. But if you really want to have let's say a more integrated approach, then you have to take a look at how am I going to build that data warehouse. Same you would do in BW4, for instance, or BW1 HANA. There you would also think about architecture. There's no different in the cloud. DWC is constantly getting better. It's like Christmas for us. Every other week or every couple of weeks, we get new functionality, which is good. But we also get bug fixes, which is even better. And DWC for us is getting a very stable platform. We can report out of it. It's doing what it needs to do, and we're very happy with that. And so is the client. Third bullet, goes without saying, I think. Use a partner who knows how to do it. And last but not least, don't underestimate the work needed in S/4HANA to create CDS views. And that's something which can be improved in our view. So if you need to combine data, you can do that in the cloud or on-prem by using CDS views. And what we see is that especially finding the correct CDS view to do the job is very difficult. So there are a couple of standard CDS views which we use at all our customers, and we have quite a number of S4 clients. There's always a sales CDS view, an analytical. There's also always something coming out of group reporting, etc., etc. But if you want to combine data, for instance, with batch data in logistics, or you want to combine open orders and closed orders and all the rest of it, it's always a bit of finding the needle in the haystack to find the correct CDS view. And the CDS views in SAP, the majority is not released yet. So actually, when you find a CDS view, it doesn't always, let's say, mean that you can use it. In the cloud, for instance, you're basically stuck. So if you cannot use the CDS view which is released, then there's a release procedure. On-prem, it's slightly different. So what we do with our on-prem customers is we release the CDS views ourselves and then build on top of that. But it's surprisingly, it takes some time to get to know the CDS tooling and also to find the correct CDS tool. So those are a couple of the lessons learned. So enough talk. I would like to pass it on now to Tim Koster, and who's going to show us something in the system. Take it away, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Ronald. So what I want to show you is basically the slide that Ronald just showed you. For me, it's not showing on the screen, but I hope it's showing for you. So it's the global sales model. Here we combine both the external sales from IGM and the internal sales coming from S/4HANA. There are a few things that we want to show you in this model. We want to show you a graphical calculation view. We want to show you how a SQL view is looking. And also I want to show you some general demo of how Data Warehouse Cloud looks. And yeah, let's go on. So I'm going into the movie now. Oh. Fortunately, I can see it now as well. So here, this is Data Warehouse Cloud. I think for a lot of you might be something familiar. What I want to show in this demo is first the space management. So if we go into space management, here you can see we have only one space. It's called IGM Production. We only have one space because unfortunately we cannot copy views at this time. So it's easier to actually use one. We have almost 90 users in that space, and we have 26 connections. And if I go into that space, you can see that, well, we're using OData. We're using OData from S/4HANA. We are loading stock data, sales data, and we're loading master data as well. And here you can see that we have 3 database users. I saw a question already. We're using CPI DS to push data into Data Warehouse Cloud HANA, the HANA database under Data Warehouse Cloud. But we're also using flat file uploads. To automate those flat file uploads, we're using CPI. So that's the answer to that question. Here you see that we go into the data replication monitor. So what we're doing is we're actually replicating the data that's coming through the OData services. That's because every time you would refresh a query, you don't want the OData service to be called. So here I'm refreshing one of the OData services, and you can see that it's actually quite fast reloading, but still. We're using only about 80 meg, but we do have a 120 gig HANA database still. So yeah, there's some room to grow. I still have some work to do. And here you can see that, yeah, we built quite some views. Some of them are deep coupling views, as Ronald just mentioned. And now I'm looking for the SAP Global Sales Report, which is sort of the trophy of all the views. It's combining external and internal sales. And Ronald just said, well, we have an architecture, and one of the things that we have is a naming convention. So Xavier, who builds the dashboards, knows that the SAC views are decoupling views towards SAC. And only in those views we actually set the semantics and the aggregation, etc., etc. The nice thing about the business catalog is that you can easily go to the lineage. In this case, it takes some time because yeah, the model is quite huge. Don't get scared because it will pop up now, and it's quite big, as you can see. On the left side, you see that there are the external sales, and every view or every tab in this view is basically a join. So on the right side, we have the sales coming from S4. On the left side, we have the external, and we do a lot of master data combinations. I want to show first a graphical calculation view, and I'm pressing this button. This button doesn't work like shown here, but through the magic of video editing, I get into the graphical view. And this is how a graphical view looks like. It's a fairly simple view that we built here, and we're combining here 3 data sources, one with budgeted data, one with the actuals coming from S4, and one with the history of in this case sales. The first and the third are both flat file uploads, and we added here through a calculated column the V type and the version which we need for making a diversion in the dashboard. In the union node, we then combine the 3 data sets together, and you can see that it will automatically on the fly does a check on the data types, etc. You can see that, for example, the ASP coming from the 3 data sources is not the same, but yeah, it works. So in this case, I'm not actually doing anything with that warning. Then I want to show you, and this is the last thing, how a SQL view looks like. So I'm ignoring this error. And this is the SQL view editor. And here, basically this is my work here. I go nuts with SQL. And here we do the more complicated stuff like adjusting for credit memos, doing some sales quantities based on alternative units, etc., etc. And yeah, that's it. I know that's my part of the demo. I now want to show. I want to give the hand to Xavier, who will actually show how the data is going to be in SAC.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Yeah, indeed, let's move over from the back end to the front end, and let's see how we can turn these views into interactive reports. And for that, we are going to use the embedded version of SAC, so SAP Analytics Cloud, which comes with Data Warehouse Cloud. So this will give us all the reporting capabilities that SAC has, but we don't have to set up a separate environment, build up connections, set up new user accounts. We can just reuse whatever is available in Data Warehouse Cloud already. So let's see how we can now start this video. I hope this works. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to show you how the workflow looks like when you build a story from the Data Warehouse Cloud environment. So we're starting in Data Warehouse Cloud, and we have the story builder option. And from here, we can create a new story. Well, for those of you who are familiar with SAP Analytics Cloud, before you can create a story, you have to select the model, which will bring you the data that you want to use in your story. So in this case, when we use Data Warehouse Cloud, we don't work with models, but we can directly log into the views that are provided by DWC. So we don't need to build the model on top of, let's say, a HANA query or a BW query. So what we're seeing right now here is how we set up a story, very basic in SAC. So we're using the view, picking up a few fields from there. We have 2 measures and a dimension, a very simple chart. And we can do some adjustments to adjust the look and feel of this chart in the report. So everything we do on the right side of the screen in the designer panel, that's reflected on the left side in the actual visualization. Well, in this example, we are also adding an input control to give some interactivity to this story, where we can select, in this case, a certain country. Yeah, so let's make that a bit bigger and move stuff around. As you can see, it's all drag and drop, no coding or scripting in SAC, and we just put a filter on Germany, and the data is being refreshed. So it's retrieved again from Data Warehouse Cloud and displayed in the chart. So Ronald and Tim already talked a bit about the spaces. When we use this workflow, we also have to stay within the Data Warehouse Cloud space. So I just stored this new story into a space. And let's say I'm just an end user and I want to refresh the story and reuse it on a daily or weekly basis. And I also have to go into that space, which in this case is called Interdobs, where we see the views from Data Warehouse Cloud plus the stories that were built. So I'm now opening the story that we just created with the chart and the filter. And well, let's add France, and then you will see that the chart is refreshed and showing data from France as well. So that's the basic workflow when we use the embedded SOC in Data Warehouse Cloud. So now let's say you want to step outside of the space, or maybe even use a completely different SOC environment, which is standalone. Well, since last summer, that's also possible. But for that, we have to use the live connection. So that's something you have to set up. That can be set up on a different tenant as well. So you can connect from a different SOC environment towards Data Warehouse Cloud. And after connecting, you have to select the space, which was called Interdobs. And within the space, we see the same view that we just used in our first demo. And from here on, the steps are basically the same. So I'm now creating another chart with some measures and dimensions, just by selecting them here in the panel on the right side. So there we go again. But now when we store the story, we are not within our Interdobs space, but we can just browse the SAC platform. And the advantage of this is that we now can also add some more authorizations around this object. So we can use teams, for example, to determine who can or cannot access this report. Also, if we browse to this report, then we have to go to the public folder. Well, we just created this webinar folder. And here we can now use the sharing settings and add teams or users to see this story. So I think that's the end of the demo. So I'm giving back to Lacey.
Thank you guys for sharing. We're going to move into Q&A from the audience for the next few minutes here. I'm just going to start reading out some of the questions that we've gotten. So the first question we have is, are the CDS views also the basis for master data?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So we, especially when we go to SAC, we use the master data CDS views to fill the public dimensions, which are used in planning. But we also use it to basically load the data into a Data Warehouse Cloud. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that one. We'll move into the next one. Do we have to use CPIDS or SBI for data ingestion?
No, we actually don't. So hi, Arvind. So no, you can basically use a couple of ways, or you can basically just load via the web. So then basically you can just load a flat file, for instance, a very simple scenario, or you use whatever you like to get data into the HANA table. So the underlying local schema, which is on the Data Warehouse Cloud, you can use whatever tool you can, as long as it supports ODBC or JDBC. Then it's just using the HANA drivers, basically. So no need for CPI, but it's convenient. Any other questions?
Answering that one. Yes, we'll move into some more. Congrats on going live with the project. Could you please share some metrics, size of DWC tenant, data volumes, number of users, any learning about performance?
Tim, you want to take that one before I...
Yeah, before you get them all. Yeah, that's it's actually what is shown in the video. So we have a 120 gig HANA database. We have around 90 users, and learnings about performance. The performance is quite good, especially since it's all virtual. So if you would go into a SAC dashboard, which we couldn't show obviously because it's all production data, it's instant. So I'm not going to say that it's my data modeling capabilities. It's the HANA database that does this work really, really good. So yeah, and it's calculating everything on the fly virtually. So yeah, no problems there.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Here we have the next question. Can we consume BEX query from BW 7.5 as a source and stage results in DWC?
That's,
I can hear you breathing, Tim, so you want to answer that question.
Oh yeah, actually I answered that question I think earlier this week. It's a feature that is coming. So what we see, we have an innovation tenant or a partner tenant with SAP, and we see that we have some connections towards SAP BW there, and we can see the queries, but they are not. They don't have the semantics as you would see them normally in analysis for Office, for example, or just in the normal query designer. So. We can actually stage the data, but we can't stage the semantics at this time, unless, what you could do is obviously join the master data again in DBC if you want. So that's the answer to that question, I guess.
Yeah. So basically, it's using the SDI adapters. So if you're familiar with the current SDI adapters, so for instance, the SDI ABAP adapter, that's actually the one which is being exposed. So that's going via ODP. So you can see your BW objects, but exactly what Tim mentioned without any of the semantics. So there's no tick where you can actually get to the BEX query or BW query as it's now called nowadays. Yeah. Any more questions?
Thank you guys for answering. Yes, we'll move into the next one. So basically for DWC, we need guys with architecture skills and SQL. Is that right?
Yeah, and a really good partner to do CPI data services in this case. Yes, that's right. For the backend, you need to set up a good architecture at this point. Even though it's a business user tool, I see that we do the most in SQL, but that's also because the complexity of this client is this. So if you would build the DBC on top of BW, BW for HANA for instance, then I would say that it's not needed that much. But yeah, here, well, Daniel, you know the project a little bit. What we're doing here is quite complex, and we're combining all kinds of external sales with internal stuff, and we need to remap master data, harmonize clients, etc., etc. So I would say that the tool is sufficient for a business user to build its own flows. It's more that the project itself is a bit complex. I hope that answers the question.
I'm sure it does. We'll move on here to the next question. Why do you need two SAC systems when SAC has a live connection to SWC? Any reasons behind?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, Vijay, can you take that one?
Yeah, so actually you don't need two SAC systems. What happens here is that the embedded SAC environment, that's something you get with Data Warehouse Cloud. So if you can ignore it and not use it, but it's there. If you already have a standalone SAC tenant, then you can use the live connection, what I showed at the end of the video, towards your Data Warehouse Cloud tenant. In our project, we have a bit of a mix, because during the project, we only had the embedded version, and the live connection wasn't there yet. But there was also a need to use the planning capabilities of SAC, and that's something you need a standalone tenant for.
Thank you. Here we have, there's just a few more questions left. here we have the next one. Is it possible already to fully automate an entire data flow, refresh data, and ...
The answer is no. So you could, that's coming. So that's one of the stuff which is actually going to be released in a couple of weeks. But there's no way of really automating flows. So actually, and the data in the system is basically virtualized, even though we replicate the data into DWC. So the S/4HANA CDS views, or the data which is stored in the tables is made persistent. All the logic which is on top of that is basically virtual. And there is no way like in HANA Cloud or in BW to actually have a transformation and a data flow. But that's something which is coming for sure. And also the whole scheduling is coming. And there's actually also a way of materializing view in the future, so that you can actually have views which are non-persistent and non-performing could actually be switched into persistent mode. So you see that there are lots and lots of nice little things coming in the coming weeks and months. But currently today, it's all virtual. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. Here we are moving into our last question of the session. You show that you have combined the data of Excel files to be S4. What is the modeling layer combining this data for sales SAC?
Yeah, that's basically DWC itself. So that's one of these SQL views which were shown. So you can basically decide what you do. So you can have, I think the most important thing to remember is that you have a couple of modeling options in DWC. So you can use these graphical joins and unions like Tim mentioned, or you can have really good old SQL where you can have lots and lots of coding and complexity. And also, put in some transformations in order to get master data enrichment and that sort of thing. So to answer the question, we use basically SQL for that. I think actually the where we combine the budget data and the Excel data is something we do in a graphical view, but that's more of a, how do you call that? It's that's convenient in this case, but the majority of the time we would just be using SQL because it's more flexible, to be honest. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes. Thank you, Ronald, Tim, and Davey, for taking the time to share with us and to answer the audience's questions. And thank you for everyone who registered and participated in today's webinar. We hope you found value in today's presentation. Before we close for today, I'd like to invite you to engage in our survey again with only 2 questions. It's a quick way to give feedback on today's webinar experience. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.